covers a little bit, covers the eye a little bit. That's okay. Little tick marks and things like that, and I'll show that in a future video. Those birds take a lot longer, and it's really more about patience than anything. But there are little tricks you can kind of use. So I'm going to just do that. This is just a simple little sparrow figure. You know, we don't have to worry about the legs or anything like that. That's coming. And so for the tail, I take my sandpaper and I roughen up the wire carefully so I don't tear it out of the armature, but just kind of go roughen it up a little bit. What this does is it creates an anchor point, so it's not so slippery. It creates an anchor point for the clay. Next, I'm going to do like a flattened cone shape. And already it has that little, you see that little bifurcation there. I'm going to keep that. That's actually not bad. Flatten that into the wire. And we're going to blend it here. Okay, now I'm going to add, tail's going to be a little wide. I usually do those kinds of areas. I usually make them a little bit wider than normal. It just helps with the strength. So I'm going to do the same thing. So make sure it's nice and wide, and then place it on my wire as so. And you see I bent that piece because I'm going to blend all that. And like I said, the tail's going to be a little bit wider than normal because normally these pieces break easily. Take my scissor and just trim off some of the clay. It's better to trim it off sometimes, I find, so that it doesn't distort your shapes too much. So I like using scissors on clay, believe it or not. Okay, so I flattened my tail, kind of blended everything. Okay, and then I took my rubber tool, my soft clay shaper, and kind of sharpened that scissor tail look. And I'm going to round it off a little bit. Okay, add a little bit of indentation in here, just to define it a little bit more. And with this step, you have to be careful so your wire doesn't come out. You know, sometimes if you press too hard, that can happen. You just have to reshape it. Okay, just start to do some lines. Now, I'm going to deepen those lines as I go, because that's going to represent the other feathers that are kind of beneath the first one. Okay, so I have my lines, and I try to get them as straight as I can. Just kind of gently go through the clay, kind of split it. And it's okay if it's not 100% straight. These are feathers that are kind of piled up on top of each other. But I do want to go here as smooth as possible. And the clay was a little bit brittle. It needed a little more conditioning. So keep that in mind. You do have to condition your clay before work. Okay. And any pieces that kind of snap off, I literally like blend them back in. Okay. And now I'm going to just do a few tick marks here to kind of show the, you know, where the tail feathers begin. Do a little bit of a few lines. Okay, and then I have a line in the middle, because these are groups of feathers. I'm going to fix that tail a little bit. And continue working on this line. This is probably the part that takes the most time. Again, this clay was not, I should have conditioned it a little bit more. Okay, so same procedure for the other wing. Notice how I give the tin foil kind of this little indentation in there and kind of raise this a little bit, this tip. Okay, that's kind of the shape so that I want. And then we're gonna continue to cover this. And if I put it up against the body and it's a little too big, well, take my scissors and start trimming away until I get a wing that's as close to the second one, to the first one as possible. Okay, and just kind of stretch your clay, cover that tin foil as much as you can, and you want to do a little bit of shaping in this stage. So, okay, but not too bad, not too bad. So I'm going to use this and kind of blend it in and do the exact same thing I did for the first wing. Now here, you can see the tin foil showing, so we're going to add a little more clay. I often think of sculpting as addition subtraction. That's kind of the method that's used. So I'm going to add little patches of clay. I don't want to take any more clay. I want to add a little more patches of clay to kind of patch that up. Okay, so the wing is on, and I just worked on smoothing the clay and kind of blending, and I still have a little more smoothing here to do. It's okay if these lines develop. I actually like it because it provides a little bit of detail. Okay, now the tinfoil shows a little bit, so I'm going to cover that up, but for the most part, you have to look at your model from every angle. And here I'm just going to cut a little bit in order to reduce, because it's a little thick on this side. So this is a way of reducing it, and then kind of work that into the body with the paddle tool to, you know, blend in that clay. See, so I just removed clay from the front of the wing, and I'm gonna continue to shape this a little bit. Now another way of smoothing and blending is using I'm using a soft tip tool here and just using the handle as a kind of rolling pin and go over sort of the lumpy areas, right? But the bird is definitely taking shape, and I'm going to use some of my soft tips to continue to round this out. One of the problems is if you use your fingers too much, you kind of expose the tinfoil a little bit. So, you know, and then you have to go back and add a little bit of clay. So I'm going to continue using my ball tool as a rolling pin. Define some of the areas. And I also use my soft tool, my soft clay shaper, to kind of smoothen out any shapes on top of the wing, any little lumps or anything, and continue to define it. Lumpiness is something that you know, it depends on what you're sculpting. You know, sometimes that lumpiness is okay. Okay, and to add details to the feathers, the main thing is this top part. And same thing as the tail, exact same thing. I kind of make these lines, and you can just feel the tin foil in there. And then I kind of sharpen the tips. I do it on the bottom. And again, when you do this, you sometimes get your clay a little lumpy as the tool is cutting. You could also wet your tool, and that kind of helps. All right, but we're going to do one more thing to the wings before we move on. I'm going to cut in here. I'm going to continue to... Okay, so it's kind of like a leaf. This is probably the part that takes the longest. Birds are very tricky because of the wing, you know, and these wing shapes tend to change from species to species. So, you know, you want to do your homework. If you really want to get into bird sculpting, you know, you really want to do your homework. There's a little bit of tinfoil that is shown here, but that's okay because I can work with that in the painting, and actually it adds a little bit of texture, you know, to the model. Kind of defines the primary feathers as opposed to like all the fluff, you know, all the fluffy feathers, the fluffy down and stuff that gives the shape of to the wing that's necessary for flight. Okay, and just I'm gonna go over the clay a little bit, just smoothing things. To give some detail to the wing, you make this line. I'm using my paddle tool, which is a little curved, and this tool helps with curved lines. Kind of want to start here, like this is where the shoulder of the wing would be, and then angle it. So it's a little bit angled and kind of coming down, and that defines your primary feathers, your outer feathers of the wing. They give that nice, you know, aerodynamic shape at the edge of the wing. And then these little tick marks here, you can close these if you want. Maybe not like that, but you can kind of close these if you want, and this defines the secondary feathers. Okay, and they don't have to be straight. In fact, if they're not straight, it looks a little more natural, because those feathers, when they fold, they kind of, you know, fold slightly different in different ways. So I'm just defining that leaf-like shape, those shapes there, and then I'm just gonna go back. Now you can file this. Once it's dry, it can be filed. This kind of clay can be filed. I'm just going over very gently the wings here, okay, and then make sure I have a nice sharp tip. Now I'm gonna blend this, add a few tick marks for feathers, and he should be ready to bake after I add the eyes. A piece, okay. So again, I'm going to have to work on smoothing this a little bit, but at least he doesn't wobble. Okay, so he's nice and firm now. So I'm going to work on that, and then we're going to bake it, and I'll show you how to paint. Okay, and to make some of the final details, if you pull on your clay, you get these kind of sharp lines, right? And sometimes you want to press on it and kind of do these like triangular shapes, you know. That's kind of another technique. I'm just doing this a little bit quick, so I'm just kind of pulling on the clay a little bit, especially along the edge, to kind of get that, you know, feathering texture. Sits nicely, and now he doesn't wobble, okay? You know, use that shape to flatten things out so the model will be more stable, okay? Next is the little eyes, and then I make a little ball of clay and kind of split it. And what I do before placing them is I make sure that they're more or less even. And that's a lot harder to do. You kind of have to play, you know, give it your judgment, okay? And kind of even it out. Whoops. Don't want to drop his little eye. Had the wrong one. Although that one kind of worked. But And again, these little birds have larger eyes, so we're going to shape that a little bit. And then I'm going to do a line here. Most birds have this line that defines the head right above the cheek area, where I have it on the bottom as well. And then round it up a little bit. Make sure it's nice and round. I'm going to take a little bit of clay from the head and kind of define the lower eyelid as well. And I mean, you can talk about eyes. That will be another video. Oh, sorry if it's not focused, guys. I really try to, I'm working with this through the camera, and I try to keep things focused, but camera does its own thing. And if I feel there's not enough clay, I could always add a little bit there, just to kind of define the eyes, and then you don't want them bulging out too much, so kind of flatten them a little bit. Make sure it's a little bit round here. And this goes all the way back, this kind of line. Do some of the tick marks. I'm going to define the beak a little bit up here. Kind of do that. Okay. Make sure my eye is as round as possible. Alright, it's not too bad. Haven't done this in a while. I'm going to do a little bit more tick marking right along the edge of the beak, and you see that line that kind of defines the beak a little bit. Okay, our little bird is baked, and this is nice and hard now. Okay, you can now at this stage take your files and kind of very gently remove any areas you don't like, any bumpiness or whatever. So I put this in the oven for 5 minutes at a temperature of 250. First, I preheat the oven to 300. Wait a couple of minutes, right? Let that oven get nice and warm. Put my sculpture on a metal cake pan, stick it in the oven, and I have a special cake pan that I use. I actually started using glass better than metal because this clay tends to stick to metal. So if you stick it in the oven, you wait about 5 minutes. I then shut off the oven, let the piece cool in there as the oven is cooling, and then pull it out. If you find it's a little leathery when you pull it out, and you'll feel it, it feels almost rubbery, that's okay. As the model cools, it's going to harden, okay? If it's too leathery, almost flexible in some areas, you might want to put it in for another minute, okay? So that comes with experience. Now, we're going to paint this piece in another video, and then I'm going to show you how to make a little scenery piece for it. Okay, we're going to make a little nest for it, and it'll make a cute little ornament for anywhere. So in the next video, we're going to paint this little sparrow sculpture. We'll choose a sparrow of our liking and just kind of paint it over. And once it's painted, we'll talk about making a little base for it. Now, it could be left like this as a simple little bird ornament, no problem. Or you can decorate it with a little base. We'll talk about different materials that you can use, maybe make a little nest around it or something. It'll be a cute little ornament in the end. So thank you very much, folks, and we'll talk next week on the Critter Creator.